And now, it should have been a video game in 1982.
Oh, hello. I'm Eric, and here's the stuff from 1982 that should have been made into a video game. From the movie Gandhi, a game similar to Beat 'em and Eat 'em, where you played as Gandhi during a hunger strike, and you had to actually dodge food that was being thrown at you by government officials. Guess that would make it Beat 'em and Don't Eat 'em, which would make more sense. This year in music, Ozzy Osbourne bit the head off of a live bat during a show, an event so infamous that it should have had its own video game. They could have called it Batman. No, they couldn't. In television this year, the sitcom Cheers premieres on NBC and the Atari 2600. You might think it'd be the precursor to Bally Midway's Tapper, but it's actually a game where you just order drinks and watch your characters waste their lives and their livers away in a bar, where everybody knows their name. Bah! Pettit. 1982. Alright, done.
Game over.
1982 was the year where Atari's hubris really started to show through.
Atari decides to announce that they are bringing Pac Man to the home market. Huge news!
Pac Man for the Atari 2600 was exactly like Pac Man for the arcade, but not good.
It barely resembles the arcade. It sounds nothing like the arcade.
Everything flickers all over the place. There isn't the right number of ghosts. The maze looks wrong. You're eating wafers, not pellets.
Stop.
You only
Stop
face
it.
in one direction.
Stop it! They put on a 4 kilobyte cartridge. I mean, 8 kilobyte cartridges have just recently come out, but 4 kilobytes, hey, that saves money. Just, do what you can and try to squeeze as much as you can into that.
All the ghosts were the same color in this game. How dull is that? That's awful.
When you play Pac Man on the Atari 2600, you see a flicker with the ghosts.
You couldn't have broken up those lines to make them look like the pellets that Pac Man eats?
No, they're the 4 ghosts. You're getting epilepsy, but it's okay because you're playing Pac Man at home.
They kicked everyone! They kicked everyone who loved Pac Man right in the nards!
Atari actually ended up with 5 million extra copies.
Oh, really?
5 million that they couldn't sell because they half-assed the port.
Well, you know what? I have 3 of them.
They think it's going to be so popular that everybody with an Atari 2600 will buy one. And millions more people will buy Atari 2600 consoles just to get Pac Man, so we had better make more copies of Pac Man than there were Atari 2600 game consoles in existence at the time.
The game sold well, but not well enough, and many consumers returned their copies to Atari.
It was Pac Man that really started the crash of '83.
Dun dun dun!
So then we get to E.T. Do we really need to actually talk about this game?
A lot of people are aware that E.T. has some issues and problems, and part of the problem with that was that I really wanted to do a breakthrough game once again.
The funny thing is, E.T. is actually not that bad a game.
No one had ever done a game in less than 5 months, 5 or 6 months, and I had 5 weeks.
Let's just get this out there. Not the worst video game of all time. Not by a long shot. Is it obtuse? Yes. Yes, it is.
And even though I only had 5 weeks, I still wanted to do a real contribution. I wanted to do a step up. I wanted to do a 3D world where it's a cube you actually run around on that you keep in your head, and here we go. And maybe that was too much, maybe I was overly aggressive.
If you actually learn to play E.T. by its own rules, it's not awful, but it was not something that anyone was happy with when they got it as a kid.
It became the game that destroyed the video game industry. So there's a part of me that really is excited about the idea that I was able to single-handedly topple a multi-billion-dollar industry.
You're falling into holes, you're trying to collect these things everywhere, there's some weird random thing chasing you.
The sales of the game were horrible. People were returning this game. They were crying. There's stories of kids honestly crying when they got this game. That's how bad this game was. It was, to them, unplayable.
I think back then, you really needed to read the instruction manual, and maybe a lot of people didn't want to. They thought everything would be like Space Invaders. You just shoot everything, you try to get a high score. E.T. was a game where you actually had to beat it.
I was presenting the 2600 design, and there was a guy from CoinOp presenting a CoinOp design, because there was going to be a CoinOp E.T. also. And we met with Spielberg and presented our designs, and once I laid this whole design out for him and stuff, and he looked at me and he said, gee, Howard, couldn't you do something like Pac Man? I had this impulse to say, well, gee, Steven, could you do something like The Day the Earth Stood Still? But I didn't say that, and I have to say that in retrospect, when I look back at that, maybe it wouldn't have been such a bad idea to try and knock off Pac Man in some way, but I couldn't do it. I mean, that's just not who I was.
They did print way too many E.T. cartridges, similar to Pac Man, and they eventually just kind of had to eat that loss.
One of the most famous legends in the history of gaming, which is apparently true, is that some obscene amount of E.T. cartridges, like 2 million cartridges or something, were buried out in the desert in Alamogordo, New Mexico.
It's another conspiracy.
Now, this is at a time where Atari was taking a nosedive, okay, financially. They were falling apart. And it's expensive to take stuff and ship it out into the middle of the desert and crush it and bury it. That's a lot of money. So it was always my contention. There were two reasons why I felt that probably was not true. One is it doesn't make sense for a company that's financially failing to spend all the additional money it would take to go and physically destroy all of these carts when they could cannibalize them and reuse some of the resources in new carts. And what are you trying to hide them from?
So many gamers have dreamed of digging up some of the E.T. games, and there's stories about they were like steamrolled and they were covered in cement, and I've heard all kinds of different things. I've heard some people say that there's like a parking lot on top of it, or it's underneath a Kmart or something.
It just doesn't make any sense. That's one reason. The other reason was I was kind of connected into the Atari grapevine by and large, and I really believe if this would have been happening, I would have heard about it back then at some point. And if I had, what I would have done was I would have hired like a photographer and flown us out and gone and stood on top of this mound of games and got my picture taken, because what a great thing that would be.
E.T. was probably the first time where the consumer had a mass revolt against a game.
Sure.
And they brought down Atari partially because of that.
Arcade break.
Jungle King is a lovely arcade game.
The original version was more Tarzan-esque.
Your character's basically Tarzan. It is Tarzan.
Basically, the main character, Tarzan, or Jungle King, looked exactly like Tarzan. He wore a loincloth and he did the Tarzan yell, and it was like...
So this got the attention of the estate of Edgar Rice Burroughs, who wrote Tarzan series in the first place. They became a little lawsuity.
So they had to change that for the systems, and it became Jungle Hunt.
They took out the Tarzan yell completely, and they changed the loincloth guy to what looks like the bad guy from Jumanji, with the little pith helmet and such.
Each stage varied in type of gameplay.
You swing from vine to vine, then you're underwater fighting off crocs, then you're jumping over boulders, and then you're trying to avoid some ethnic stereotypes, trying to cook your girlfriend alive in a pot.
When you think adventure, you think guy in a pith helmet swinging on knot vines through the jungle. That's a Jungle Hunt.
It's not the smoothest playing game, but for the time it was good.
He becomes a prisoner in a world of his own making. The World of Tron.
Disney released Tron in 1982. It had an unbelievable amount of computer graphics to make the film. It was visually stunning at the time.
The movie Tron has these special effects that still blow my mind.
The first sort of like video game movie, and the first movie with a huge amount of special effects and CG graphics. Almost every frame, once they're in the computer world, oh man, they did all these like light effects, and I'm not sure how they even did it.
Tron's an ugly ass movie, dude.
Don't pretend like you don't like Tron. Everybody likes Tron.
The inspiration for the movie? Pong. Luckily, they didn't take it too literally. I can't imagine a movie based solely on Pong.
The visuals in it are just so different.
No, Johnny, no!
And the movie looks like a video game.
So what is Tron known for? The CG effects, the cool like tanks that are CG rendered. The light cycle sequence is amazing.
The graphics were supposedly really amazing for the time.
Which is incredible considering the computer they used to create these animations only had 2 megabytes of RAM.
Now it is visually appalling.
Don't hate.
But in the story, Jeff Bridges, who rules, He is a video game developer, not getting credit for any of his games. Sounds familiar? He's getting run out of his company. And so he gets sucked into the video game. And what ensues is a overrated, meandering plot for the next 2 hours.
You shut up.
I remember that one scene where like Kurt Russell and somebody else was, they were in like the ship, and then one of them was dying, and then he had to drink the water or whatever, and it was like sparkly as shit, but it was like masked. So like all the textures were moving, not in the same. Tron.
Nowadays, at least to me, it looks more like when you go to midnight bowling and they have the ultraviolet lights and it makes your white shirts glow, and it's like, ooh, I'm bowling, and it's craziness. Ooh.
I can't watch Tron.
But the arcade game, I love the Tron Arcade game.
The game was unique in that it had a selectable path.
So basically I could choose any order in which I wanted to suck.
My favorite thing about the Tron Arcade cabinet is it's just like the movie, it's just got this really striking visual look to it.
The black light, all in the cabinet, great.
And it's just got that really unique joystick right there on the console that's like glowing blue. It's got these bright blue lights in it.
You had tanks, just like combat, you know, like where you shoot the tanks, combat.
So the two weird mini games is the grid bugs and the weird rainbow snow cone you gotta destroy in the game. What the hell is going on there?
It's at the end of the movie!
It's terrible!
No, it's awesome!
I don't like that! But the light cycle part's fantastic. And the bugs are fun, I guess.
F yourself!
Along with the movie, there were 3 Tron games for the Intellivision. They were Tron Deadly Discs, Tron Mazatron, and Tron Solar Sailor. I like to call them the Tron Intellivision Trilogy, or TIT for short.
And I just look at it as, you know what, it laid the groundwork for the Journey game the next year. That's why I love the Tron video game. I'm gonna hit you so hard. In 1982, evil Microsoft, not so evil yet, released their first version of Flight Simulator.
The joy of flying around through
beautiful pastel pictures.
At the time, there was no such thing as a flight simulator. Pretending to actually fly. Usually you're just pretending to shoot aliens and rescue little guys dangling in the air, falling to their death.
Some nice magenta, maybe some lime green, and you had all sorts of neat little dials, and you start out on this this runway, and you hit a button and it goes.
You weren't just shooting aliens, or you were trying to do something for real. Simulate flying.
This is not a game that any 3-year-old should start his video gaming journey out on.
Flight Simulator, we're going to be blowing up jets or something like that. No, it's about as dry and vanilla of an actual flight simulator as you get. You're flying commercial planes.
And then all of a sudden there's like a crack on your windshield and you can't move anymore, which is the nice way of saying you did by Microsoft.
It's like the show Wings.
Arcade break.
Popeye by Nintendo, one of my favorite classic arcade games.
The interesting thing about Popeye is that when Nintendo created Donkey Kong, they were originally out to get a license for Popeye.
They suddenly were like, oh no, we don't want you to be using Popeye. And so Shigeru Miyamoto had to be like, okay, well, we'll come up with something off, the top of my head, and it'll be random. And there you go, Donkey Kong, stupid monkey.
So it's interesting, a year later, they acquired the rights to Popeye and came out with a completely unique game that looked actually really good.
I remember the first time I played Popeye, I was incredibly annoyed because I was wondering why I couldn't punch Brutus.
Olive Oil is throwing things for Popeye to catch, be it hearts or letters spelling help.
You punch the spinach can, but then once you are energized, you don't use the punch button to hit Brutus, you just run into him, which I always thought was really weird. That was kind of like counter, like, don't you want to punch him?
Yeah, there was this renaissance of Popeye in the early 80s.
And all I started with the Popeye spinach.
It's the only time I liked the character, actually, is that game.
Well, blow me down.
So in 1982, we still have companies, just these random companies, putting out systems and testing the waters. We have Connecticut Leather Company, Coleco, putting out the Colecovision, which is actually a really wonderful system.
The Pac-In game was Nintendo's Donkey Kong, which was huge for Coleco to get that game, because that game was so popular at the time. And it just, that game, because of that game, this console sold very well.
The main thing that Coleco did, which is what a lot of the third-party games did, was they just opened up the checkbook and started buying licenses. So they had Donkey Kong and Mousetrap, and they had a lot of arcade machines. And of course, Atari had a lot of those sewn up already, because a lot of them were Atari games.
Now, at the time, you could play Donkey Kong on the Intellivision, which you can barely make out the gorilla on it, or you can play it on the 2600 maybe, and it's maybe slightly better looking like a gorilla, but it's still not. The Colecovision port of Nintendo's groundbreaking title, it looks like the arcade game. It's close. It's not exact, but it's damn close. And compared to the other versions, it's so much a step above.
The first level, unfortunately, is backwards. The way the building is made, it's just reversed.
Like Twilight Princess for the Wii.
Yeah.
Unlike other systems at the time, like the 5200, there was a lot of good standalone games that were only on the ColecoVision. You had games like Mousetrap that were really good ports from the arcade version. The Zaxxon port was probably the best one. Zaxxon was a great arcade game that came out in '82, and almost everyone who had a ColecoVision had to get Zaxxon. You had the Smurf game. I love that Smurf game.
So it's great, and it's an early platformer. So it's not the first of its kind, but it is kind of, at the time, it was still very unique to play a game of this variety.
They came out with a 2600 converter that you would pop in right into the system and play 2600 games.
Yeah, the expansion module.
Right.
ColecoVision said, you know what? We understand you already have Atari games, probably. How about you buy our expansion module, so on the ColecoVision you can play your 2600 game library on our system. Atari sued them but lost, because ColecoVision wasn't stealing any Atari technology, no. They were just getting stuff that was already existing and putting this thing together.
You can play Atari 2600 cartridges on ColecoVision, but you can't play ColecoVision on Atari.
And they also had a steering wheel that was the Pac-In with Turbo, another arcade hit. And they also had the action joystick.
Yeah, it was like a trigger joystick.
Super action joystick.
Yeah.
And it had like twirl to it on the actual stick.
I've never seen a controller like that since.
No.
It's pretty
pretty innovative for the time.
Love the ColecoVision. It's my favorite pre-Nintendo system by far. And yeah, ColecoVision. It did extremely well in sales until the video game crash. And that's a shame because, yeah, ColecoVision, good Coleco. Way to come back from your handhelds and blips and tabletops. ColecoVision. Buy it today.
And now, the gaming innovation of 1982.
Oh, hello. In 1982, what new innovation graced the world and changed the face of gaming forever? The D-pad. Designed by Gunpei Yokoi for the Donkey Kong Game & Watch, there had been many ways to control up, down, left, and right in video games before, either with discrete buttons or joysticks, but this was the first time that all four functions were available in one control, easily identifiable by touch. This is an innovation that we use to this day in all sorts of video game consoles, and we owe Mr. Yokoi a great debt of gratitude. That does it for the video game innovation of 1982. And don't forget, it's not just nostalgia, it's science. Nailed it!